Mara Bennett froze the moment she saw the shadows moving behind the frosted glass of the cabin door. Her hand still gripped the paper bag with the forgotten dinner order, and her heart began to pound so hard she could feel it in her ears. The door was open just a crack, and through that crack she could hear low voices, tense and hurried, speaking words she could not understand. Something about the air felt wrong, heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. She should have turned around right then. She should have walked back to her car and driven straight home. But her feet would not move, and her curiosity, the same curiosity that had gotten her into trouble her whole life, pulled her one step closer to the door. It was almost midnight, and the diner where she worked had just closed for the night. Ellie, the night manager, had rushed out to her with a bag in her hand, breathless and apologetic. A customer named Cale Ashgrove had ordered food an hour earlier and left before it was ready. Ellie could not leave the diner unattended, so she begged Mara to drive it out to his cabin, just a short way past the edge of town, near the old pine woods. Mara had agreed without thinking twice. It was extra money, and the drive would only take 15 minutes. She had no idea that this simple favor would change the entire direction of her life. The road leading to the cabin was quiet, lined with tall trees that blocked most of the moonlight. Mara's old car bounced over the gravel path, her headlights cutting through the darkness like two thin blades. She had never been out this far before. Most people in town knew to stay away from this part of the woods, though nobody ever explained exactly why. There were rumors, of course, whispered between customers over coffee, about a powerful family that owned most of the land out here, people who kept to themselves and did not like visitors. Mara had always assumed they were simply wealthy and private. She never imagined there was anything more to the story. When she finally reached the cabin, its windows were dark except for a faint golden light glowing from inside, flickering like candlelight. The building itself was large and beautifully built, with thick wooden beams and a wide porch that wrapped around the front. It looked peaceful from the outside, almost like a picture from a travel magazine. Mara parked her car a short distance away and stepped out, still holding the paper bag with the food inside. She smoothed down her uniform and took a breath, reminding herself that this was just a delivery, nothing more. As she climbed the porch steps, she noticed the front door was not fully closed. It hung open just slightly, as if someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to shut it properly. Mara paused, unsure of what to do. In her mind, she pictured knocking gently and calling out to announce herself, letting whoever was inside know she had arrived with their food. But before she could even lift her hand to knock, she heard something that made her stomach twist with unease. It was a voice, low and rough, speaking urgently, followed by a strange metallic clicking sound, like tools being handled with great care. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe the homeowner was fixing something, some late-night repair project. Maybe there was a perfectly normal explanation for the tension she felt crawling up her spine. But something about the tone of the voices did not sound like casual conversation. It sounded careful, secretive, almost frightened. Mara's hand trembled slightly as she reached out and gently pushed the door open just a little further, enough to peek inside without stepping through completely. What she saw stole the breath right out of her lungs. In the dim light of the front room, two men stood over the body of a third man lying motionless on the floor. Both of the standing men wore dark clothing and had scarves pulled up over the lower half of their faces, hiding everything except their eyes. One of them held a syringe filled with a strange liquid that seemed to glow faintly, a color somewhere between silver and blue, unlike anything Mara had ever seen. The other man knelt beside the body, holding down an arm to keep it still while his partner prepared to inject the strange substance. The man on the floor was unmistakably handsome, even in his unconscious state, with dark hair falling across his forehead and broad shoulders that seemed too powerful for an ordinary person. Mara did not know his name yet, though she would soon learn it belonged to someone far more important than she could have ever guessed. All she knew in that moment was that something deeply wrong was happening in front of her, and she had walked straight into the middle of it. Her mind raced through a dozen thoughts at once. She should run. She should call for help. She should do something, anything, other than standing frozen in the doorway like a startled deer caught in headlights. But her body refused to cooperate, locked in place by pure shock. The paper bag slipped from her fingers and hit the wooden floor with a soft thud, the sound far louder in the silence of the night than it should have been. Both masked men snapped their heads toward the door at once. Their eyes locked onto Mara, and for a moment, nobody moved. The air in the room seemed to freeze entirely, thick with tension so sharp it felt like it could cut skin. Mara's breath caught in her throat, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. She had never in her life felt fear like this, sudden and complete, stealing every rational thought from her mind. The man holding the syringe cursed under his breath and straightened up quickly, his eyes darting between Mara and his partner. The other man released his grip on the unconscious figure's arm and rose to his feet as well, his posture tense, ready to react. Mara took an instinctive step backward, her hand reaching for the doorframe to steady herself. She wanted to speak, to explain that she was only delivering food, that she meant no harm, but the words would not form in her mouth. For a few agonizing seconds, nobody said anything. Mara could hear her own pulse thundering in her ears, drowning out almost every other sound. She noticed small details despite her fear, the way the strange liquid in the syringe seemed to shimmer unnaturally under the dim light, the way the man on the floor's chest rose and fell slowly but steadily, proof that he was still alive, at least for now. Then, without warning, the taller of the two masked men took a step toward her, his hand reaching toward his belt where something metallic glinted. Mara's survival instincts finally kicked in, cutting through the fog of shock. She spun around and grabbed the first thing her hand could find near the doorway, a heavy iron fire poker resting against the porch railing, likely left there for the fireplace inside. She swung it wildly in front of her, more out of desperation than any real skill, creating enough distance to keep the man from closing in. The sudden movement startled both men. They exchanged a quick, tense glance, clearly weighing their options. Getting caught by a witness was not part of whatever plan they had been following. Every second they remained was a risk neither of them seemed willing to take. The shorter man muttered something urgent, his voice tight with warning, and after a brief hesitation, the taller man stepped back, lowering his hand from his belt. Mara kept the poker raised, her arms shaking from the sheer adrenaline coursing through her body. She had never held a weapon in her life, had never imagined herself capable of such a thing, yet here she stood, prepared to defend herself against two dangerous strangers in the middle of the night. Time seemed to stretch unbearably as the men calculated their next move, their masked faces betraying nothing beyond their sharp, calculating eyes. Finally, the shorter man made a decision. He grabbed his partner's arm and pulled him toward the back of the cabin, away from the main door and away from Mara. They moved quickly, slipping through a rear exit she hadn't even noticed before, their footsteps fading into the darkness of the surrounding woods within moments. The sound of their retreat was quick and practiced, as if they had planned an escape route long before tonight. Mara stood frozen for several more seconds after they disappeared, her chest heaving, her hands still trembling around the iron poker. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Her mind struggled to process the reality of it all, the strange syringe, the unconscious man, the two masked strangers who had fled the moment she appeared. It felt like something out of a movie, not something that could possibly be happening to her. An ordinary waitress from an ordinary small town. Slowly, cautiously, she lowered the poker and turned her attention to the man lying on the floor. He had not moved this entire time, his breathing shallow but steady, his face pale under the soft light of the room. Mara took a hesitant step inside, her earlier fear now mixing with a rising concern for the stranger's well-being. Whoever he was, he needed help, and she was the only one there to give it. She knelt beside him carefully, studying his features in the dim light. He looked to be in his early 30s, with strong, defined features and an unmistakable presence, even while unconscious. There was something about him that made her feel like she was in the presence of someone important, though she could not explain exactly why. Perhaps it was the quality of his clothing, simple but clearly expensive, or the confidence etched into his relaxed features even in sleep. Mara reached out hesitantly and touched his shoulder, gently shaking him. There was no response. She checked his pulse, the way she remembered from an old first aid class years ago, relieved to feel a steady beat beneath her fingers. Whatever had been injected into him had not stopped his heart, at least not yet, but she had no idea what long-term effects it might have. Her mind raced with questions. Who were those men? What was that strange liquid? And most importantly, who was this man they had targeted? She glanced around the room, searching for any clue that might explain the situation. On a small table near the fireplace, she spotted a leather wallet, seemingly dropped in the chaos. With trembling hands, she picked it up and opened it, finding an identification card inside. The name printed across it read, Cale Ashgrove. Mara stared at the name for a long moment, feeling a strange sense that she should recognize it, though she could not quite place why. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees surrounding the cabin, creating an eerie whistling sound that made Mara's already frayed nerves jump. She knew she could not simply leave this man here, unconscious and vulnerable, especially with those two dangerous strangers possibly still lurking nearby. But she also had no idea who to call, or how to explain what she had just witnessed, without sounding completely unbelievable. Her phone was in her car, she realized suddenly, left behind in her rush to deliver the food. She would have to make a decision, and quickly. Leave the stranger and go find help, or stay by his side and try to keep him safe until he woke up. Every instinct told her to run, to get as far away from this strange and dangerous situation as possible. But another part of her, the part that had always felt a stubborn pull toward doing the right thing, refused to abandon an injured man, alone in the dark. Taking a steadying breath, Mara made her choice. She would stay. She grabbed a nearby blanket draped over a chair and carefully covered the unconscious man, trying to keep him warm while she figured out her next move. As she worked, she noticed faint markings on his exposed forearm, strange symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly under the dim light, similar to the color of the liquid the masked men had been preparing to inject. Mara frowned, leaning closer to study them, but before she could examine them further, a soft groan escaped the man's lips. Her heart leapt into her throat. He was waking up. Mara pulled back slightly, unsure of what to expect. The man's eyelids fluttered, his breathing quickening as consciousness slowly returned to him. She watched, frozen between hope and fear, wondering what kind of person she had just risked her safety to protect, and wondering, with a growing sense of unease, exactly what kind of world she had just stumbled into. The night outside remained dark and silent, but inside the small cabin, everything was about to change. Mara had no way of knowing yet just how much her life was about to be turned upside down, how the choice she had just made to stay would pull her into a world far stranger and more dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. All she knew, kneeling there in the flickering light beside a stranger named Cale Ashgrove, was that there was no turning back now. Cale's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening with a strange intensity that made Mara's breath catch. For a moment, he simply stared at the ceiling, blinking as if trying to remember where he was. Then his gaze shifted toward her, and something flickered behind his eyes, something wild and unreadable, like an animal sizing up its surroundings for the first time. Mara stayed perfectly still, unsure whether to speak or wait. His breathing was ragged, and beads of sweat had formed along his hairline despite the cool night air drifting through the open door. He pushed himself up onto one elbow, wincing as though the effort cost him more than it should have. His muscles tensed beneath his shirt, and for a brief second, Mara thought she saw something strange ripple across his skin, like a shadow passing beneath the surface, though she quickly told herself it was simply a trick of the dim light. "Who are you?" he said, his voice low and rough, carrying an edge of suspicion that made Mara's pulse quicken again. "My name is Mara," she said quickly, keeping her voice as calm as she could manage. "I brought food from the diner. Ellie sent me. I found the door open, and then I saw two men. They were doing something to you. I don't know what, but it looked bad, and I made a noise, and they ran." Cale's eyes narrowed, studying her carefully, as though trying to determine whether she was telling the truth. He glanced down at his own arm, noticing a small mark near the inside of his elbow, red and slightly swollen. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, his expression darkened into something far more serious than confusion. "Two men," he repeated slowly. "Did you see their faces?" Mara shook her head. "They had scarves covering most of it. I only saw their eyes. One of them was taller, broader through the shoulders. The other one seemed more nervous, like he was following the first one's lead." Cale pressed his palm against his forehead, clearly trying to steady the dizziness that still lingered from whatever had been injected into him. He sat up fully now, testing his strength, though his movements remained slower than they should have been for someone so clearly capable and composed under normal circumstances. Mara noticed the way his gaze kept drifting toward the open door, as though he expected the intruders to return at any moment. "You should not be here," he said finally, his tone firm but not unkind. "This is not a safe place for someone like you right now." "I didn't exactly plan on walking into this," Mara replied, a flash of frustration cutting through her lingering fear. "I was just trying to bring you your dinner." Despite the tension in the room, something in her tone seemed to catch him off guard. He studied her for a long moment, his expression softening slightly, though the wariness never fully left his eyes. He seemed to be recalculating something, adjusting his understanding of the situation, now that he realized she was simply an innocent bystander, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. "What did you see them do exactly?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more focused. Mara hesitated, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. One of them was holding a syringe. It had some kind of liquid inside, and it was glowing, almost like it had a light of its own. The other one was holding your arm still. I think they had already given you some of it before I got here, because you weren't moving at all when I first saw you. Cale's hand instinctively moved to the mark on his arm, pressing against it gently, his expression turning grim. He muttered something under his breath that Mara could not quite make out, though it sounded less like a curse and more like a name, spoken with quiet frustration. Whatever thoughts were running through his mind, they clearly troubled him deeply. "How long ago did they leave?" he asked. "Only a few minutes before you woke up," Mara answered. "I don't know if they're still nearby. I didn't hear a car, but I also wasn't really paying attention to anything, except making sure you were still breathing." For the first time since waking, something close to gratitude flickered across Cale's face, though it was quickly hidden behind a more guarded expression. He rose to his feet slowly, testing his balance, one hand braced against the wall for support. Mara instinctively reached out to help steady him, though he seemed to catch himself before he needed it, straightening to his full height with visible effort. He was taller than she had realized, and even weakened as he clearly was, there remained an unmistakable presence about him, an authority that seemed woven into the very way he carried himself. Mara found herself stepping back slightly, suddenly aware of how small and out of place she felt standing in this cabin, with a man she knew almost nothing about. "I need you to tell me everything, in as much detail as you can remember," Cale said, moving toward the window and glancing out into the darkness beyond. "Every detail matters. What they wore, how they moved, anything they said to each other." Mara took a steadying breath and did her best to recount everything, from the moment she first noticed the door ajar to the sound of the men fleeing through the back exit. Cale listened intently, his expression unreadable, occasionally asking a sharp, precise question that made it clear he was piecing together something far larger than she understood. She mentioned the strange symbols she had noticed on his forearm, and his eyes flickered toward the mark again, his jaw tightening. "That should not have been visible," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Not unless that liquid was already taking effect." "What was in that syringe?" Mara asked, unable to hold back the question any longer. "And why would anyone want to hurt you like that?" Cale turned to face her fully now, his expression caught somewhere between suspicion and reluctant respect. He seemed to be weighing how much to tell her, how much truth she could handle without either panicking or refusing to believe him entirely. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "There are things about me, about this place, that most people never learn," he said carefully. "Things that would sound impossible if I told you outright. But you helped me tonight, whether you intended to or not, and that means you deserve at least some explanation, even if the full truth has to wait." Mara's heart pounded at his words, uncertainty and curiosity swirling together inside her. Part of her wanted to demand answers immediately, while another part of her, the more cautious part, wondered if she truly wanted to know what secrets this cabin and this man were hiding. She thought of the strange shimmer she had seen ripple across his skin, the glowing liquid in the syringe, the way his presence alone seemed to command the very air around him. "Try me," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. A faint, almost amused expression crossed Cale's face, quickly replaced by seriousness once more. He moved toward the fireplace, running a hand along the mantel as though gathering his thoughts, before turning back to face her directly. "My name is Cale Ashgrove," he said. "I lead a community that lives differently from most people you have ever known. We are stronger and faster than most, and capable of things that would seem unbelievable to someone outside our world. Tonight, two men attempted to weaken that strength, to change what makes us who we are. If they had succeeded fully, the consequences would have reached far beyond just me." Mara stared at him, trying to process his words, searching his face for any sign that he was joking or testing her in some way. But his expression remained completely serious, his eyes steady and unwavering, carrying a weight that made it impossible to dismiss what he was saying as nonsense. "Are you telling me you're not like everyone else?" she asked slowly, unsure of how else to phrase such an unusual question. "Not in the way you would expect, no," Cale answered, "and neither are the men who did this to me. They knew exactly what they were doing and exactly what would happen if they succeeded. This was not a random act. It was planned, carefully, by someone who understands our world far better than an outsider ever could." A chill ran down Mara's spine at his words. If what he said was true, then whoever had targeted him was not simply a stranger passing through. They were someone connected to whatever hidden world Cale belonged to, someone who understood things Mara could not yet begin to comprehend, and if that were true, it meant the danger from tonight was far from over. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, glancing toward the door, half expecting the masked men to reappear at any moment. Cale's expression hardened, determination replacing the earlier confusion in his eyes. "Now, I need to contact people I trust, quickly, before whoever sent those men decides to try again. And you," he added, his gaze fixing on her with unexpected intensity, "you need to understand that simply by being here tonight, you have already become part of something you cannot easily walk away from." Mara felt a knot tighten in her stomach at his words. She had only wanted to deliver a forgotten dinner order, nothing more. Yet somehow, within the span of less than an hour, she had witnessed a dangerous attack, learned that the man she helped was far from ordinary, and now stood on the edge of a world stranger than she ever could have imagined. Outside, the wind continued to move softly through the trees, carrying with it an unspoken warning that the night's dangers were far from finished. Mara glanced toward the darkened windows, wondering if unseen eyes were watching them even now, waiting for another chance to strike. Whatever safety she had felt in her ordinary life before tonight was gone, replaced by an uncertain and unfamiliar path she had never chosen, but could no longer avoid. Cale moved toward a small desk near the corner of the room, retrieving a phone hidden beneath a stack of papers. His fingers moved quickly, dialing a number from memory, his eyes never leaving Mara, as he waited for someone to answer. Whatever came next, Mara realized, she would not be facing it alone, but she also had no idea whether that thought brought her comfort or even greater unease. The call connected after only 2 rings, and Cale spoke in short, clipped sentences, his voice carrying an authority that made it clear he was used to being obeyed instantly. Mara could not hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Cale's face carefully, noting the way his jaw tightened with every word he received in response. Whoever he was speaking to seemed to be asking rapid questions, and Cale answered each one with the same calm precision, though his eyes kept darting toward the windows, as if expecting danger to arrive at any second. "Send Callum," Cale said finally. "Tell him to bring Grace as well, and have the perimeter checked before anyone approaches the cabin directly. I do not want more surprises tonight." He ended the call, and set the phone down on the desk, exhaling slowly, as though releasing tension he had been holding since the moment he woke. He turned back to Mara, studying her with an expression that seemed to weigh several conflicting thoughts at once. She stood near the fireplace, arms wrapped around herself, still trying to process everything that had happened in the span of less than an hour. "Help is coming," he said, his tone softening slightly. "My people will be here soon. When they arrive, I need you to let me speak first. Some of them may not immediately understand why a stranger is standing in my home during a moment like this. I'm not exactly thrilled about being here either," Mara admitted, though there was no real bitterness in her voice, only exhaustion and lingering fear. "I just wanted to drop off some food and go home." Cale's lips twitched slightly, something close to a smile threatening to appear despite the seriousness of the situation. "Fate has a strange sense of timing," he said quietly, before his expression grew serious once more. "But you should know this. What you witnessed tonight cannot simply be forgotten or explained away. My world operates by different rules than the one you know, and those rules do not always leave room for outsiders who stumble into our secrets, even by accident." A knot of anxiety tightened in Mara's chest at his words. She had already guessed that something unusual was happening around her, something beyond ordinary explanation, but hearing him confirm it so plainly made the reality of her situation feel even heavier. She thought about home, about her small apartment and her quiet, uneventful life, wondering how much of that normalcy she might lose because of a simple act of kindness gone wrong. Before she could ask any further questions, The sound of tires crunching against gravel echoed from outside the cabin. Cale's posture immediately shifted, his senses sharpening as he moved toward the window, peering out into the darkness. Mara watched as headlights swept across the trees, illuminating the path leading up to the cabin. Within moments, 2 vehicles pulled to a stop, and several figures emerged, moving with a controlled urgency that spoke of practiced discipline. The first man to approach the porch was tall and broad-shouldered, with short dark hair and sharp, alert eyes that scanned the surroundings, before settling on Cale through the window. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to leadership, though clearly one who answered to Cale without hesitation. Behind him walked a woman with calm, steady eyes and a small bag slung over her shoulder, her expression focused and professional despite the tension surrounding the scene. Cale moved to open the door fully, stepping aside to allow them entry. "Callum," he said, acknowledging the tall man first. "Grace," he added, nodding toward the woman. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Callum's eyes immediately swept the room, taking in every detail with practiced precision, before landing on Mara with obvious suspicion. His expression hardened, and he took a protective step closer to Cale, positioning himself between the alpha and the unfamiliar woman standing near the fireplace. "Who is she?" Callum asked bluntly, his voice carrying an edge of distrust. "She is the reason I am still breathing," Cale replied evenly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Her name is Mara. She interrupted the attack before it could be completed. Whatever suspicions you have, set them aside for now. We have more urgent matters to address." Callum's gaze lingered on Mara a moment longer, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to challenge Cale's judgment openly. He gave a curt nod and turned his attention back to the room, instructing 2 other men who had entered behind him to search the surrounding area for any remaining signs of the attackers. Grace, meanwhile, moved directly toward Cale, gently taking his arm to examine the mark left by the injection. "Tell me everything you remember," Grace said softly, her fingers pressing carefully against the swollen skin near his elbow. Every detail could matter. Cale recounted the events as clearly as he could, though gaps remained in his memory from the moments before he lost consciousness. Grace listened intently, her brow furrowing with concern as she examined the mark more closely. She retrieved a small vial from her bag, carefully collecting a sample of blood near the injection site for further analysis. "The color of the liquid you described concerns me," Grace said, glancing briefly toward Mara for confirmation of the details Cale had already shared. "Silver blue, you said?" Mara nodded, stepping closer despite Callum's obvious disapproval. It looked like it was glowing, faintly. "I've never seen anything like it before." Grace's expression grew even more serious at this confirmation. "That matches rumors we have heard. Whispers about a substance being developed that could suppress our abilities, perhaps permanently. If this is what I believe it to be, this was no ordinary attack. Someone invested significant resources into creating this." The room fell silent for a moment, as the weight of her words settled over everyone present. Cale's expression darkened further, his earlier calm giving way to something colder and more calculating. Whoever had orchestrated this attack clearly possessed both the knowledge and the resources to threaten not just him personally, but potentially the entire structure of the world he led. "Do we have any leads on who might be responsible?" Cale asked, his voice steady, despite the tension evident in his shoulders. Callum shook his head grimly. "Nothing definitive yet. We will need to question anyone who knew about your location tonight. Anyone with access to information about your movements. This was not random. Someone knew exactly where to find you, and precisely when to strike." Cale's gaze flickered briefly toward Mara before returning to Callum, a silent understanding passing between them regarding the sensitivity of what needed to happen next. "Begin with the household staff," he instructed, discreetly. "I do not want unnecessary panic spreading before we understand the full scope of what we are dealing with." As the enforcers continued their search of the surrounding property, Grace finished her examination of Cale's injury, applying a soothing salve to reduce the swelling, while cautioning him that the full effects of whatever had been injected might not become apparent immediately. She recommended close monitoring over the following days, watching carefully for any unusual symptoms or changes in his strength and abilities. Throughout this exchange, Mara remained largely silent, watching the unfolding scene with a mixture of fascination and unease. She was beginning to understand, piece by piece, that she had stumbled into something far larger and more complex than a simple act of interrupted violence. Cale was not merely a wealthy recluse living quietly in the woods. He was a leader, responsible for an entire hidden community, and the attack against him carried implications reaching far beyond his own personal safety. Eventually, Callum turned his attention back to Mara, his earlier suspicions still evident, though tempered now by a grudging acknowledgement of her role in the night's events. "You said you saw their eyes clearly enough to describe them," he said. "Would you be willing to work with us, to help create a more detailed description that might assist in identifying them?" Mara hesitated, glancing toward Cale for guidance. She had never imagined herself becoming involved in an investigation like this, especially one connected to a world she barely understood. Yet she also felt a stubborn sense of responsibility, a feeling that she could not simply walk away, now that she had witnessed so much. "I'll help however I can," she said finally, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. Cale studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, his tone carrying more weight than the simple words suggested. "But understand this. Helping us means stepping further into a world that carries real danger. Danger that will not simply disappear once tonight ends. I need you to consider that carefully before committing yourself further." Mara nodded slowly, understanding the seriousness of his warning, yet unable to shake the conviction that had settled over her since the moment she had chosen to stay rather than flee. Whatever path lay ahead, she had already made her choice the instant she picked up that iron poker, to defend a stranger's life. Turning back now felt impossible, even with the uncertainty and danger that clearly awaited her. Outside, the search continued through the surrounding woods, though no further trace of the attackers was found. Whoever they were, they had vanished as quickly and quietly as they had arrived, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a growing sense of unease that settled over everyone gathered within the cabin. As the night wore on, it became increasingly clear that this was only the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous situation, one that would test loyalties, uncover hidden betrayals, and forever change the course of Mara's ordinary life. Morning light filtered weakly through the curtains of a guest room within the Ashgrove estate, and Mara woke with a jolt, momentarily forgetting where she was. The unfamiliar surroundings, the soft blankets, the quiet hum of an unfamiliar house settling around her, all reminded her instantly that the previous night had not been some strange dream. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, trying to piece together the sequence of events that had led her here, to a guest bedroom inside the private residence of a man she had known for less than 12 hours. After the search of the cabin grounds had turned up nothing useful, Callum had insisted that Mara could not simply return to her own home, not with the possibility that the attackers might still be watching her, aware that she had witnessed their failed attempt. Cale had reluctantly agreed, offering her a room within his family's main residence until the situation could be better understood. Mara had protested at first, insisting she had a life to return to, a job waiting for her, an apartment with bills that would not simply pause because of one strange night. But exhaustion and the lingering fear from what she had witnessed eventually wore down her resistance, and she had allowed herself to be escorted to this unfamiliar house just before dawn. Now, in the quiet light of morning, the reality of her situation felt even more overwhelming. She rose from the bed and moved toward the window, pulling back the curtain slightly to observe the grounds outside. The estate was larger than she had imagined the previous night, surrounded by dense forest on all sides, with several smaller buildings scattered across the property, presumably housing other members of whatever community Cale led. Figures moved between the buildings, going about what appeared to be ordinary morning routines, though Mara found herself studying them carefully, wondering which of them might share whatever unusual nature Cale himself possessed. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to find Grace standing in the doorway, a tray of food balanced carefully in her hands. The healer offered a small, reassuring smile as she stepped inside, setting the tray down on a nearby table. "I thought you might be hungry," Grace said kindly. "And a little disoriented, given everything that happened." "That's putting it mildly," Mara replied, managing a weak smile of her own, as she moved to sit at the table, grateful for the simple comfort of a warm meal after the chaos of the previous night. Grace took a seat across from her, studying Mara with a thoughtful expression. "Cale mentioned you handled yourself remarkably well. Considering the circumstances, most people would have panicked entirely." "I think I did panic," Mara admitted. "I just happened to grab something heavy while I was doing it." Grace's smile widened slightly at this, though it faded quickly into a more serious expression. "I imagine you have a great many questions this morning," she said. "About us, about what you witnessed, about what happens next." Mara nodded, setting down her fork, as the weight of everything she wanted to ask settled heavily in her mind. "Cale mentioned that your community is different, stronger and faster than ordinary people, but he never really explained what that actually means." Grace considered her words carefully, before responding, clearly weighing how much information was appropriate to share without Cale present. "Our world has existed alongside the ordinary one for a very long time," she said finally. "Hidden, mostly by necessity, though not because we wish anyone harm. We simply function differently, and history has shown that difference is not always met with understanding." "Are you saying you can change into something else?" Mara asked hesitantly, recalling the strange shimmer she thought she had seen ripple across Cale's skin the previous night. Grace's expression remained calm, though something flickered briefly behind her eyes, perhaps surprise at how quickly Mara had begun to piece things together. "That is part of it, yes," she said carefully, "though the full explanation is something better suited for Cale himself to share, when the time is right." Before Mara could press further, the door opened once more, and Cale stepped inside, looking considerably more composed than he had the previous night, though faint traces of exhaustion still lingered around his eyes. He nodded a brief greeting toward Grace, before turning his attention fully toward Mara. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked, his tone carrying genuine concern. "Confused, mostly," Mara admitted honestly, "and a little overwhelmed, if I'm being honest." Cale's expression softened slightly at her candor. "That is an understandable response, given everything you experienced. I wish I could offer you a simpler explanation, but the truth is rarely simple in situations like this." Grace excused herself quietly, offering Mara a reassuring nod, before slipping out of the room, leaving Cale and Mara alone, for the first time since the events of the previous night had begun to settle. Cale took a seat across from her, his expression growing more serious as he studied her carefully. "I owe you an explanation," he said finally, "and I intend to give you one, though I ask for your patience as I do so. What I am about to tell you will likely sound impossible, but I need you to trust that everything I say is true." Mara nodded silently, bracing herself for whatever revelation awaited her. "My community, the people you saw last night, and will likely see more of during your time here, are not entirely human," Cale said carefully. "We possess the ability to transform, under certain circumstances, into a more powerful form, one that grants us abilities far beyond what ordinary people are capable of. Strength, speed, heightened senses. It is a part of who we are, passed down through generations, hidden carefully from the outside world for our own protection." Despite everything she had already witnessed, hearing the words spoken so plainly still sent a shock of disbelief through Mara's chest. She stared at Cale, searching his face for any hint that this was some elaborate joke, yet finding only complete sincerity in his steady gaze. "You're saying you can turn into something like an animal," she said slowly, trying to wrap her mind around the concept. "In simplest terms, yes," Cale confirmed. "Though the reality is far more complex than that description suggests. It is not merely a physical transformation, but a deeper connection to instincts and abilities that most humans never experience." Mara sat in stunned silence for a long moment, processing the enormity of what she had just been told. She thought back to the strange markings she had noticed on his forearm the previous night, the shimmer she had witnessed ripple across his skin, and suddenly, pieces of the confusing puzzle from the previous night began falling into place with startling clarity. "And the men who attacked you," she said slowly, "they wanted to take that ability away from you." Cale's expression darkened at her words. "Precisely. The substance they attempted to inject into me was designed to suppress those abilities entirely, potentially permanently. If they had succeeded, I would have lost not only my strength, but likely my position of leadership as well, leaving my community vulnerable to whoever orchestrated this attack." "Do you have any idea who that might be?" Mara asked, though she already suspected, based on the tension she had witnessed among Cale's people the previous night, that the answer remained frustratingly unclear. "Not yet," Cale admitted, frustration evident in his tone. "But whoever it is clearly possesses detailed knowledge of my movements and my community's inner workings. This was not the work of outsiders. Someone close to me, someone trusted, likely provided the information necessary to plan such a precise attack. The implications of his words settled heavily over Mara, and she found herself suddenly understanding the depth of danger surrounding not just Kale, but everyone connected to his community, including herself, now that she had become entangled in these events. If a traitor truly existed within Kale's inner circle, then anyone could be a threat, and trust itself had become a dangerous and uncertain thing. "What does this mean for me now?" Mara asked quietly, voicing the question that had been weighing on her mind since waking that morning. Kale's expression grew contemplative, clearly considering his response carefully before speaking. "It means, for the time being, you remain under my protection, whether that arrangement is comfortable for either of us or not. The men who attacked me saw your face. Until we understand who they are, and why they targeted me, I cannot in good conscience allow you to return to a life unprotected, especially knowing they might view you as a loose thread needing to be addressed." A chill ran through Mara at his words, the reality of her situation becoming even more unsettling. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness, delivering a forgotten dinner order, would result in her being pulled so completely into a hidden, dangerous world she barely understood. Yet despite her fear, she also felt a strange, undeniable curiosity pulling her forward, a desire to understand more about this world, and the man who now sat across from her, carrying the weight of leadership and danger, with a quiet, steady resolve that she found herself unexpectedly admiring. "I suppose I don't have much choice in the matter," she said finally, attempting a small, wry smile despite the tension still coiled tightly within her chest. "You always have a choice," Kale replied seriously, "but I hope, for both our sakes, that you choose to stay, at least until we can ensure your safety more thoroughly. In the meantime, I promise to answer whatever questions you have, honestly and completely." Mara studied him for a long moment, weighing the uncertainty of the path ahead against the strange, undeniable connection she already felt forming between them. Whatever fear lingered from the events of the previous night, she found herself unable to deny the pull of curiosity, and perhaps something more, drawing her deeper into this hidden and dangerous world. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling within her. "Then let's figure out who did this." The following days settled into a strange new rhythm for Mara, one that felt both unfamiliar and, oddly enough, increasingly natural. She had expected to feel like a prisoner within the walls of the Ashgrove estate, yet Kale had made clear from the beginning that she was a guest, not a captive, free to move about the grounds as she wished, provided she remained accompanied by someone familiar with the property's security arrangements. Most mornings that companion turned out to be Grace, whose calm and steady presence had quickly become a source of comfort amid the overwhelming strangeness surrounding Mara's new circumstances. Not everyone within the community shared Grace's welcoming attitude, however. As Mara walked the grounds one afternoon, accompanying Grace toward the small clinic where the healer tended to various minor injuries among pack members, she noticed several pairs of eyes following her with open suspicion. A young man near the training yard muttered something under his breath as she passed, his tone clearly disapproving, though Mara could not quite make out his exact words. "Don't mind Ryan," Grace said quietly, noticing Mara's discomfort. "Trust does not come easily to our people, especially not toward outsiders, and especially not so soon after an attack against our leader. Give it time." "I understand the hesitation," Mara replied, though she could not entirely shake the uneasy feeling that came with being so openly regarded with suspicion. "I probably wouldn't trust a stranger who suddenly showed up in the middle of something like this either." Grace offered a reassuring smile. "Kale trusts you. For many here that carries significant weight, even if it takes time for their behavior to reflect it." As they continued toward the clinic, Mara found herself reflecting on just how quickly her life had transformed since that fateful night. She had once been an ordinary waitress, content with the simple routine of her days. Yet now she found herself walking the private grounds of a hidden community, surrounded by people capable of extraordinary abilities she was only beginning to understand. The shift in her circumstances felt almost dreamlike, yet the very real danger underlying it all kept her firmly grounded in reality. Later that day, Kale found her sitting quietly near a small garden at the edge of the property, watching the afternoon light filter through the trees. He approached slowly, offering a brief nod of greeting, before settling onto the bench beside her, maintaining a respectful distance between them. "Callum tells me the investigation has produced a few promising leads," he said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Mara turned toward him, curiosity immediately overtaking her earlier contemplative mood. What kind of leads? Several members of my household staff reported noticing unfamiliar vehicles near the property in recent weeks, Cale explained. Nothing alarming enough to raise immediate concern at the time, but in hindsight, likely connected to whoever was planning the attack. Callum is working to trace the vehicles, though progress remains slow. What about the men themselves? Mara asked. The ones who actually attacked you. Have you found anything about who they might be? Cale's expression grew more troubled. Nothing definitive yet, though Grace's analysis of the substance used against me has confirmed her earlier suspicions. It was designed specifically to suppress our abilities, created by someone with significant knowledge of our physiology. That kind of expertise is rare, and dangerously so. The weight of his words settled heavily between them, and Mara found herself once again grappling with the unsettling implications of what such knowledge might mean for the safety of Cale's entire community. If someone possessed the ability to create such a targeted weapon, then the threat extended far beyond a single failed attack. It suggested a larger, more calculated plan, one that could potentially be attempted again, perhaps even successfully, if the perpetrator remained undiscovered. You think it's someone close to you, don't you? Mara said quietly, recalling his earlier suspicions. Someone who would know exactly when and where to find you alone. Cale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I do not want to believe it, but the evidence increasingly points in that direction. Very few people knew about my private visits to that cabin. It is meant to be a place away from the demands of leadership, somewhere I can occasionally find peace. Who knew about it? Mara asked carefully, sensing the sensitivity of the subject. My closest advisors, Cale admitted reluctantly. Callum, of course, given his role in my personal security. And Ivy, my father's former advisor, who has remained a trusted voice within our community since his passing. Mara studied his expression carefully, noting the subtle tension that flickered across his features at the mention of Ivy's name. You don't sound entirely convinced of her innocence, she observed. Cale sighed heavily, running a hand through his dark hair in evident frustration. Ivy has served this community loyally for decades. The thought of her involvement feels almost impossible to consider seriously. Yet I cannot ignore the fact that very few people held both the knowledge of my location and the standing necessary to arrange such a precise and carefully planned attack. The conversation lapsed into a thoughtful silence, as both of them considered the unsettling possibilities before them. Mara found herself once again amazed at how quickly she had become entangled in matters far beyond her original, simple existence. Now finding herself discussing potential traitors within a hidden society she had known nothing about mere days earlier. I want to help however I can, Mara said finally, breaking the silence between them. I know I'm an outsider, and I know most of your people don't trust me yet, but I already saw those men's eyes. If there's any way I can help identify them, I want to try. Cale studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his gaze before he finally spoke. Callum has been working with a sketch artist within our community, attempting to create a visual representation based on your description. Would you be willing to work with her directly? Of course, Mara replied without hesitation. Cale nodded, appreciation evident in his expression. Thank you. I know this situation has placed an unfair burden upon you, one you never asked for or expected. Yet your willingness to help, despite everything, has not gone unnoticed. Mara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, an unexpected reaction given the seriousness of their conversation. She found herself studying Cale's face more closely than she had allowed herself to before, noticing details she had overlooked amid the chaos of their first meeting. The quiet strength in his expression, the weight of responsibility he carried so steadily, the genuine gratitude reflected in his eyes, despite his position of power and authority. I meant what I said before, she said softly. I want to help you find whoever did this, not just because I feel obligated, but because it's the right thing to do. Cale's gaze softened further at her words, something shifting subtly in the atmosphere between them. You continue to surprise me, Mara Bennett, he said quietly. Most people, upon learning the truth about our world, would flee as quickly as possible, desperate to return to the safety of ignorance. Yet you seem determined to walk deeper into danger, entirely by choice. Maybe I've always been a little stubborn, Mara admitted with a small, wry smile. Or maybe I just don't like the idea of dangerous men getting away with hurting someone simply because they were too scared to stop them. A rare, genuine smile crossed Kale's features at her response, the first Mara had seen from him since their initial, chaotic meeting. It transformed his features entirely, softening the usual seriousness that seemed permanently etched into his expression, revealing instead a warmth that Mara found herself unexpectedly drawn toward. As the afternoon sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon, the two of them remained seated together in comfortable silence, each contemplating the uncertain and dangerous path that lay ahead. Whatever challenges awaited them in uncovering the truth behind the attack, Mara found herself increasingly certain of one thing. She was no longer simply an unwilling participant caught in circumstances beyond her control. She had chosen, deliberately and with full understanding of the risks involved, to see this dangerous mystery through to its conclusion, regardless of where that path might ultimately lead her. The sketch artist, a quiet woman named Lily, worked with patient precision as Mara described the attacker's eyes in as much detail as she could remember. Session after session, small adjustments were made, the shape of a brow, the shade of an iris, the particular way one man's gaze had narrowed with tension in the moment before he fled. By the third day, two rough but increasingly detailed portraits had taken shape, capturing enough distinctive features that Callum believed they could begin circulating them discreetly among trusted contacts. Mara stood beside Cale as Callum spread the finished sketches across a long table in the estate's main study, both men studying the images with focused intensity. Grace stood nearby as well, her arms crossed, her expression thoughtful as she examined the drawings for any hint of recognition. "Do either of these look familiar to you?" Cale asked, glancing toward Callum first. Callum shook his head slowly. "Nothing certain. Though there's something about the jawline in this one," he said, tapping the sketch of the taller attacker. "That reminds me vaguely of someone from the Northern Territory, though I cannot place a name." "The Northern Territory," Mara repeated, glancing between them. "Is that another pack, like this one?" "A neighboring community, yes," Cale explained. "Relations between our territories have remained cordial, for the most part, though not without occasional friction over shared resources and boundaries." "Could someone from there have orchestrated this?" Mara asked. "It's possible," Cale admitted, though his tone carried clear reluctance. "Though it would represent a significant and dangerous escalation if true. An attack of this nature against another community's leader would carry serious consequences. Consequences that whoever planned this must have carefully weighed and, evidently, deemed acceptable." Grace leaned closer to examine the sketches once more, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's something else worth considering," she said slowly. "The precision of that serum. Its design specifically targeting our physiology. That level of expertise suggests involvement from someone with access to detailed research that exists only within a handful of secured locations across our communities." Cale's expression grew increasingly troubled at this observation. "You're suggesting the serum itself might have originated from within our own territory. I'm suggesting it's a possibility we cannot afford to ignore," Grace replied carefully. The room fell into a heavy silence as the full weight of this implication settled over everyone present. If the serum truly had originated from within Cale's own community, then the traitor they sought was not merely someone with knowledge of his private schedule, but someone with direct access to highly sensitive and dangerous research, someone trusted enough to work within the very heart of the community's most protected secrets. "Who has access to that kind of research?" Mara asked quietly, sensing the gravity of the question, even as she voiced it. Cale's jaw tightened, his gaze drifting briefly toward the doorway, before returning to the sketches spread across the table. "A very limited circle," he admitted. "Myself, Callum, Grace, of course, given her medical expertise, and Ivy, who has long overseen matters related to our historical research and preservation." The mention of Ivy's name once again brought a palpable tension into the room. Callum's expression darkened slightly, though he said nothing immediately, clearly wrestling with his own uncertainty regarding the woman who had served as a trusted advisor for as long as he could remember. "I don't want to believe it either," Callum said finally, breaking the silence. "But we cannot allow personal loyalty to blind us from pursuing every possible lead, no matter how uncomfortable." Cale nodded slowly, though the reluctance in his expression remained evident. "Arrange a quiet conversation with her," he instructed. "Nothing accusatory, not yet. I want to understand her recent activities, her whereabouts on the night of the attack, without alerting her to our suspicions prematurely." Callum agreed, though his expression remained troubled, as he gathered the sketches and prepared to distribute them discreetly among his most trusted contacts throughout the community. As he moved toward the door, he paused, glancing back toward Mara with an expression that had noticeably softened since their earlier, more guarded interactions. "Your descriptions have given us more to work with than I expected," he said, a grudging respect evident in his tone. "Thank you for your patience through this process." Mara offered a small, genuine smile in response, grateful for the shift in his attitude, however small it might be. As Callum exited the room, Grace excused herself as well, leaving Cale and Mara alone once more, amid the quiet tension that had settled over the discussion. "You seem troubled," Mara observed gently, noticing the way Cale's shoulders remained tense, even after the others had left. "Ivy has been a part of my life since childhood," Cale admitted, his voice quieter now, carrying an unmistakable weight of personal conflict. "She served my father faithfully for decades, before continuing that service under my leadership. The thought that she might be involved in something so calculated, so deliberately designed to harm me, feels almost impossible to reconcile. Sometimes the people closest to us are capable of surprising us in the worst possible ways," Mara said softly, though she immediately regretted the bluntness of her words upon seeing Cale's expression tighten further. "I know," he said quietly. "That is precisely what worries me most." They sat together in contemplative silence for several moments, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily upon them both. Mara found herself studying Cale's expression carefully, noticing the subtle signs of exhaustion and strain that had gradually accumulated over the past several days, hidden beneath his usual composed exterior. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," she said finally, surprising herself with the sincerity in her own voice. Cale glanced toward her, something shifting behind his gaze, an unspoken gratitude mixed with genuine surprise at her words. "You continue to offer more support than I have any right to expect from someone in your position," he said quietly. "Maybe I've decided that being in this position means more than just staying safe until this is over," Mara replied. "I've already seen too much, learned too much, to simply stand on the sidelines now." A comfortable silence settled between them once more, though this time, it carried a different quality, something warmer and more intimate than the earlier tension of their discussion. Mara found herself increasingly aware of how much her feelings toward Cale had shifted since their first chaotic meeting, evolving from simple fear and confusion into something far more complex and difficult to define. As evening approached, casting long shadows across the study through the tall windows, Cale rose from his seat, offering Mara a hand to help her to her feet as well. "Thank you," he said simply, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "For everything you have done, and for everything I suspect you will continue to do, despite the danger surrounding us both." Mara felt her cheeks warm slightly under the intensity of his gaze, an unfamiliar yet not unwelcome sensation, given the seriousness of their circumstances. "We're going to find out who did this," she said firmly, more to reassure herself than anything else. "And when we do, they'll answer for what they tried to do to you." Cale's expression grew resolute at her words, determination replacing the earlier weariness in his eyes. "Together then," he said quietly, extending his hand toward hers, in a gesture that felt far more significant than a simple handshake. Mara took his hand without hesitation, sealing an unspoken partnership between them, one built upon the strange and dangerous circumstances that had brought them together, yet strengthened by a growing trust and connection neither of them had anticipated when this journey first began. Whatever challenges still lay ahead in uncovering the truth behind the attack, Mara felt increasingly certain that she would face them without regret, standing firmly beside the man whose life she had once unknowingly saved, and whose fate now felt inexplicably intertwined with her own. A sharp knock at the door pulled Mara from a light, uneasy sleep, and she sat up quickly, her heart already racing before she had even fully registered the sound. She glanced toward the window, noting the darkness still blanketing the grounds outside, suggesting it was still well before dawn. Another knock followed, more urgent this time, and Mara rose quickly, pulling on a robe left for her use, before hurrying to answer the door. Grace stood on the other side, her expression tense and alert, in a way Mara had not seen since the very first night of the attack. "Cale needs you," Grace said without preamble. "Now." Mara's stomach dropped at the seriousness in Grace's tone. "What's happened?" "There's been another incident," Grace replied, already turning to lead the way down the hall. Not against Kale this time. Against you. The words sent a jolt of cold fear through Mara's chest, and she quickened her pace to keep up with Grace's brisk stride through the quiet, dimly lit corridors of the estate. What do you mean against me? I've been here the entire night. Someone attempted to access the room where your personal belongings are being kept, the ones brought over from your apartment, Grace explained, her tone clipped with barely restrained tension. One of the night guards caught them before anything could be taken, but they escaped before he could identify them clearly. Mara's mind raced as she processed this new development. She had assumed that remaining within the protected walls of the estate would keep her relatively safe from further danger, yet clearly, whoever had targeted Kale was still actively pursuing loose ends, and it seemed she herself had become one of those loose ends. They arrived at the main study to find Kale already present, along with Callum, both men wearing expressions of grim concern as they examined a small collection of Mara's personal items spread across the table. Kale looked up as she entered, his gaze immediately softening with relief at seeing her unharmed, though the tension in his shoulders remained evident. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately, moving toward her with obvious concern. "I'm fine," Mara assured him, though her voice trembled slightly, despite her best efforts to remain composed. "What happened exactly?" Callum answered before Kale could respond. "One of our night guards noticed movement near the storage room, where your belongings were being kept until we could arrange for your apartment to be properly secured. He confronted the intruder, but they fled before he could apprehend them or get a clear look at their face." "Did they take anything?" Mara asked, glancing toward the scattered items on the table. "Nothing appears to be missing," Callum confirmed, though it's clear they were searching for something specific, given how thoroughly your belongings had been gone through before the guard interrupted them. Mara felt a chill settle over her at this realization. Whoever had broken in was not simply attempting theft. They had been looking for something, perhaps information about her connection to the events of that first night, or perhaps something else entirely that she could not begin to guess. "This confirms what we feared," Kale said grimly, turning toward Callum. "Whoever is responsible for this considers Mara a threat, someone capable of identifying them if given the opportunity. We cannot allow her to remain vulnerable any longer." "I've already increased security around the guest wing," Callum replied. "Additional guards will be posted throughout the night, and I'm arranging for a more thorough sweep of the grounds to ensure no further intrusions go unnoticed." Mara listened to the exchange with a growing sense of unease, the reality of her precarious situation settling more heavily upon her with each passing moment. She had known, on some level, that danger remained a possibility even within the protected walls of the estate, yet the direct nature of this attempt against her personal belongings made the threat feel suddenly much more immediate and real. "Do you think it's the same men from that night?" she asked, glancing between Kale and Callum. "It's possible," Callum said thoughtfully, "though it could also indicate involvement from someone within our own community, someone with access to information about where your belongings were being stored, information that was not widely shared beyond a small circle of trusted individuals." The implication hung heavily in the air between them, reinforcing the earlier suspicions surrounding Ivy's potential involvement in the initial attack. If someone within Kale's inner circle had access to such specific details about Mara's temporary living arrangements, it suggested the traitor they sought remained dangerously close, watching and waiting for further opportunities to eliminate any threats to their concealed plans. "Have you spoken with Ivy yet?" Mara asked quietly, recalling their earlier discussion regarding a discreet conversation meant to gauge the advisor's involvement without alerting her to their suspicions. Kale's expression grew troubled. "Briefly, yesterday afternoon." She claimed no knowledge of the attack, expressing genuine concern and outrage at the suggestion that anyone within our community could be responsible for such a betrayal. Her reaction seemed convincing, though I confess my judgment may be compromised given our long history together. "What did Callum think?" Mara asked, glancing toward the enforcer captain. Callum's expression remained carefully neutral, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features briefly. Her reaction seemed genuine to me as well, though I cannot discount the possibility that she is simply skilled at concealing her true intentions. We have known her for decades, trusted her judgment on countless matters. If she has indeed betrayed that trust, she would certainly understand how to maintain a convincing facade. The uncertainty surrounding Ivy's potential guilt left everyone in the room feeling increasingly unsettled. The lack of clear answers only heightening the tension that had steadily built since the initial attack. Mara found herself wishing desperately for some definitive proof, some clear indication of who was truly responsible, if only to end the exhausting uncertainty that had come to define nearly every waking moment since that fateful night at the cabin. "What do we do now?" she asked, glancing between Cale and Callum, seeking some sense of direction amid the mounting confusion. Cale's expression hardened with renewed determination. "We increase our vigilance and continue pursuing every available lead, no matter how uncomfortable the implications may become." Callum: "Arrange for Ivy's recent activities and correspondence to be more closely monitored, discreetly, without arousing her suspicion. If she is indeed responsible, she will eventually make a mistake that reveals her true intentions." Callum nodded firmly, already turning to depart, and set these instructions into motion. As he left the room, Grace stepped forward, her expression softening slightly as she addressed Mara directly. "You should try to get some rest," she suggested gently. "I know that's easier said than done given tonight's events, but exhaustion will only make everything feel more overwhelming." Mara appreciated the kind suggestion, though she doubted sleep would come easily, given the anxious energy still coursing through her body. Grace excused herself as well, leaving Cale and Mara alone once more, amid the quiet tension of the early morning hours. "I'm sorry," Cale said softly, once they were alone. "You should never have been placed in this kind of danger. This entire situation is a burden you never asked to carry." "I chose to stay," Mara reminded him gently. "I chose to help. Whatever danger comes with that choice, I'll face it, just like I told you before." Cale studied her for a long moment, something deeply conflicted flickering behind his gaze. "Your courage continues to surprise me," he said quietly, "though I find myself increasingly troubled by the danger my world has brought into your life." "Then let's make sure that danger doesn't win," Mara replied firmly, meeting his gaze with steady determination, despite the exhaustion and fear still lingering beneath the surface of her resolve. A faint, appreciative smile crossed Cale's features, though the underlying tension remained clearly present in his expression. Together, they stood in the quiet study, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily upon them both, yet bound together by a shared determination to uncover the truth, regardless of the painful revelations that pursuit might eventually bring to light. 3 days after the failed break-in, Callum arrived at the study with news that finally offered a genuine breakthrough in the investigation. Mara had grown accustomed to the daily rhythm of updates and dead ends, each conversation carrying a mixture of hope and frustration, as the search for answers continued without clear resolution. This time, however, Callum's expression carried a different quality, sharp and focused, suggesting he had finally uncovered something substantial. "We found him," Callum announced as he entered the study, where Cale and Mara had been reviewing the sketches once more, searching for any overlooked detail that might assist the ongoing search. One of the attackers, a contact within the Northern Territory, recognized the sketch and provided a name: Derek Holt. Cale's expression sharpened immediately at this revelation. "Do we know his current location?" "He's being held at a safe house just outside our northern border," Callum confirmed. "My contact managed to detain him, after recognizing his connection to recent suspicious activity in the area. He's willing to answer questions, provided we handle the situation quietly and offer him certain assurances regarding his own safety." "What kind of assurances?" Cale asked, his tone carrying clear suspicion. "Protection from whoever hired him," Callum explained. "He claims to fear retaliation if his cooperation becomes known. Given the sophistication of the operation against you, I imagine his concerns are not unfounded." Cale considered this for a long moment, before nodding decisively. "Arrange for his transport here, under careful guard. I want to speak with him directly." Callum departed to set the necessary arrangements into motion, leaving Cale and Mara alone once more, amid the cautious optimism generated by this unexpected development. Mara felt a surge of relief at finally having a concrete lead to pursue, though the underlying tension surrounding Ivy's potential involvement remained unresolved, casting a persistent shadow over even this positive news. Later that evening, Derek Holt arrived under heavy guard, his expression carrying a mixture of fear and reluctant resignation as he was led into a secure room within the estate. Mara watched from a discreet distance as Cale entered, to begin questioning him directly, Callum standing close by, ready to intervene should the situation require additional caution. Derek was younger than Mara had expected, his features carrying a nervous energy that suggested he was far from a seasoned criminal, despite his involvement in such a calculated and dangerous attack. His eyes darted toward Cale with obvious apprehension as the Alpha took a seat across from him, his expression calm but carrying an unmistakable authority that clearly unnerved the younger man. "Tell me everything," Cale said simply, his tone leaving no room for evasion. Derek hesitated, glancing toward Callum briefly before returning his attention to Cale. "I was hired for the job, along with my partner. We were told it would be simple, that you would be alone, unguarded, and that the substance we were given would incapacitate you quickly, without permanent complications." "Who hired you?" Cale asked, his voice steady, despite the tension evident in his posture. Derek's hesitation grew more pronounced, clearly weighing the risks of revealing this crucial piece of information, against whatever consequences he feared from his employer. "I never met them directly," he admitted finally. "All communication happened through intermediaries, arrangements made carefully to avoid any direct connection back to whoever was actually responsible." "But you must have some idea," Cale pressed, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I know the payment came from someone with significant resources," Derek said carefully, "and I know the information about your schedule, your private visits to that cabin, came from someone with detailed personal knowledge of your movements. That's not something an outsider could have easily obtained." Mara felt her pulse quicken at this confirmation, the earlier suspicions surrounding Ivy solidifying further with each detail Derek provided. Cale's expression remained carefully controlled, though Mara could see the subtle tension building beneath his composed exterior, as the implications of Derek's testimony became increasingly clear. "Did you ever hear a name?" Cale asked. "Anything that might help identify who was truly behind this?" Derek shook his head slowly. "Nothing direct, though I do recall my partner mentioning something once, during our final preparations before the attack. He said the person coordinating everything seemed remarkably familiar with the internal workings of your community, almost as though they had spent considerable time within your inner circle." This confirmation, though not entirely conclusive, added further weight to the mounting suspicion surrounding Ivy's potential involvement. Cale's jaw tightened visibly, the personal betrayal implied by this revelation clearly weighing heavily upon him, despite his efforts to maintain professional composure during the questioning. "Where is your partner now?" Cale asked, shifting the conversation toward locating the second attacker. "I don't know," Derek admitted. "We separated immediately after the failed attack, following instructions to avoid contact until further notice. I have no way of reaching him, even if I wanted to." Cale continued questioning Derek for some time longer, extracting additional details regarding the serum's origin, the arrangements made for payment, and any other fragments of information that might assist in identifying the true mastermind behind the attack. Though Derek's answers remained frustratingly incomplete in certain areas, the overall picture emerging from his testimony continued pointing toward someone deeply embedded within Cale's own community. Once the questioning concluded, Callum escorted Derek to a secure holding area, ensuring his continued cooperation while arrangements were made regarding his ultimate fate. Cale remained in the study, his expression heavy with the weight of what he had just learned, as Mara approached quietly, offering what comfort she could through her simple presence. "It's her, isn't it?" Mara said softly, though it was more statement than question at this point. Cale's silence confirmed her suspicion before he finally spoke. "Everything points toward Ivy's involvement, yet I still find myself struggling to fully accept it. She has been part of my life since before I can even remember, a constant presence throughout my childhood, and continuing through my father's leadership and my own." "Betrayal often comes from the people we least expect," Mara said gently, recalling her own words from days earlier, though the reality of the situation felt far heavier now that concrete evidence had begun accumulating against someone Cale clearly still cared for deeply. "I need proof," Cale said finally, his voice hardening with renewed resolve. "Concrete evidence before I confront her directly. Suspicion alone is not enough. Not for someone who has served this community as faithfully as she has for so many years." "What kind of proof would convince you?" Mara asked. "Access to her private communications," Cale replied thoughtfully. "Records of financial transactions that might connect her to the payment Derek mentioned. Something undeniable. Something that leaves no room for alternative explanation." "How do we get that?" Mara asked. Cale's expression grew calculating, already formulating a plan despite the personal difficulty of what he was proposing. Callum will need to arrange a discreet search of her private quarters, timed carefully to avoid detection. It's a delicate matter, one that could severely damage trust within our community if handled incorrectly, but I see no other path forward that offers the certainty we need. Mara nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. Whatever careful investigation had brought them to this point, the coming days would likely determine, once and for all, whether Ivy's long history of loyal service had truly given way to a calculated and dangerous betrayal, one that had already nearly cost Cale his life, and continued to threaten the safety of everyone connected to this unfolding and increasingly perilous situation. Callum returned late the following night, his expression grave as he entered the study, where Cale and Mara had been waiting anxiously for any word regarding the search of Ivy's private quarters. He carried a small leather folder under his arm, and the tension radiating from his posture made clear that whatever he had discovered confirmed their worst suspicions. "I found records," Callum said without preamble, setting the folder down on the table and opening it to reveal a series of documents. Financial transactions routed through several intermediary accounts, ultimately connecting back to a payment matching the amount Derek described. There's also correspondence, carefully coded, but unmistakable once properly decrypted, discussing details about your private schedule and movements. Cale's expression remained carefully controlled as he examined the documents, though Mara could see the visible strain in his shoulders, the personal betrayal, represented by this evidence, clearly weighing upon him despite his efforts to maintain composure. He studied each page carefully, his jaw tightening with every confirming detail. "There's more," Callum continued, his tone growing even more serious. "It appears Ivy's motivations extend beyond simple payment. The correspondence suggests a longer-term plan, one aimed at destabilizing your leadership entirely, potentially positioning someone else, someone we haven't yet identified, to assume control of the community in the aftermath." Mara felt a chill settle over her at this revelation. What had initially seemed like a targeted, isolated attack now appeared to be part of a far more elaborate and dangerous conspiracy, one that threatened not just Cale's life, but the entire stability and future of the community he led. "Do we know who this other person might be?" Cale asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Not yet," Callum admitted, "though the correspondence suggests they hold significant standing within our broader network. Someone with the credibility necessary to be considered a viable alternative leader, should your position become compromised." Cale closed the folder slowly, his expression hardening into something colder and more determined than Mara had yet witnessed from him. "Where is Ivy now?" "In her quarters, unaware that we've discovered this evidence," Callum replied. "I thought it best to consult with you before taking any further action." "Bring her here," Cale said firmly. "It's time we confronted this directly." Callum nodded and departed to retrieve Ivy, leaving Cale and Mara alone once more, amid the heavy tension that had settled over the room, following this devastating confirmation. Mara reached out instinctively, placing a comforting hand on Cale's arm, feeling the tense muscles beneath her touch. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know how much this must hurt. Discovering someone you trusted so deeply has betrayed you this completely." Cale's expression softened slightly at her touch, though the underlying anger and hurt remained clearly visible beneath his composed exterior. "I appreciate your concern," he said quietly, "but right now, I need to focus on what comes next. Whatever pain this betrayal causes personally must wait until the immediate danger has been fully addressed." Mara nodded in understanding, though she remained close beside him, offering silent support as they waited for Callum's return. When the door finally opened again, Ivy entered first, her expression carrying a practiced calm that immediately began faltering as she took in the grave expressions of everyone gathered within the room, along with the folder of evidence sitting prominently upon the table. "Cale," Ivy said carefully, her eyes darting briefly toward the folder before returning to meet his gaze directly. "What is this about?" Cale's expression remained coldly composed as he gestured toward the folder. "I think you already know." Ivy's carefully maintained composure began visibly cracking under the weight of his steady, accusatory gaze. She glanced toward Callum, then toward Mara, before finally returning her attention fully to Cale, her expression shifting rapidly through several conflicting emotions, before finally settling into something resigned and defeated. "You were never meant to survive that night," she said finally, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable bitterness that had clearly been building for far longer than Mara had realized. If that woman hadn't interrupted things, none of this would have been necessary. The confirmation, spoken so directly, sent a wave of shock through the room, despite the mounting evidence that had already made her guilt increasingly apparent. Cale's expression hardened further, though a flicker of genuine pain flashed briefly behind his eyes, before being carefully suppressed once more. "Why?" he asked simply, his voice carrying a rawness that revealed just how deeply this betrayal had wounded him personally. "Your father made promises to me once," Ivy said, her voice growing sharper with long-suppressed resentment. "Promises about my own family's standing within this community. Promises that were conveniently forgotten once he passed, and you assumed leadership. I have watched for years as others were elevated, while my own contributions went consistently overlooked. So you decided attempted murder was an appropriate response," Cale said, his tone carrying a cold fury that made even Mara flinch slightly at the intensity behind his words. "I decided that if this community would not honor its debts to me willingly, I would ensure they were paid one way or another," Ivy replied, her expression hardening with unrepentant conviction. "You were never meant to lead forever, Cale. Someone more deserving was always going to take your place eventually." "Who?" Cale demanded. "Who were you working to install in my place?" Ivy's expression grew guarded once more, clearly recognizing that she had already revealed far more than she intended. "That information no longer matters," she said finally. "My plan has failed. Whatever consequences follow, I will face them alone." "Famed." Cale studied her for a long moment, clearly recognizing the futility of pressing further given her evident resolve to protect whatever remained of her larger conspiracy. He turned toward Callum instead, his expression settling into cold, decisive authority. "Take her into custody," he instructed. "She will face judgment according to our laws, though I suspect further information may yet be extracted through proper channels." Callum moved to comply, though Ivy offered no resistance, as she was led from the room, her expression carrying a strange mixture of defiance and quiet defeat. As the door closed behind them, Cale remained standing motionless for several long moments, the full weight of the betrayal finally settling over him now that the confrontation had concluded. Mara moved closer, gently placing her hand against his back in a gesture of quiet comfort. "You handled that with more strength than I could have imagined," she said softly. Cale turned toward her, something raw and vulnerable flickering behind his usually composed expression. "It doesn't feel like strength," he admitted quietly. "It feels like losing someone I trusted for my entire life, discovering that trust was built on nothing but resentment and lies." "I'm sorry," Mara said again, unsure of what other comfort she could offer in the face of such a personal and painful revelation. Cale reached out, taking her hand gently in his own, drawing a small measure of comfort from the simple connection. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for standing beside me through all of this, even when you had every reason to walk away." "I told you," Mara replied softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Despite the exhaustion and lingering pain evident in his expression, a faint, genuine warmth crossed Cale's features at her words. Yet even as this immediate threat had been addressed, both of them understood that Ivy's confession had revealed a larger, unresolved conspiracy, still lurking somewhere within the shadows of their community, one that would require continued vigilance and determination to fully uncover and dismantle. 2 weeks passed following Ivy's confession, weeks filled with careful investigation, as Callum worked tirelessly to uncover the identity of the mysterious figure Ivy had been working to install in Cale's place. Progress remained slow, Ivy herself refusing to reveal any further details despite repeated questioning, her earlier defiance hardening into stubborn silence as she awaited whatever judgment the community's laws would eventually bring against her. Mara had settled further into her unusual new life within the estate during this time, gradually earning the cautious respect of many within the community, who had initially regarded her with such open suspicion. Ryan, the young man who had once muttered disapprovingly as she passed, now offered polite nods of acknowledgement whenever their paths crossed, a small but meaningful shift in the community's overall attitude toward her presence. One evening, as Mara walked alongside Cale through the quiet gardens at the edge of the estate, Callum approached with an urgency that immediately signaled a significant development in the ongoing investigation. His expression carried a mixture of concern and grim satisfaction as he reached them, slightly out of breath from his hurried pace across the grounds. "We've identified him," Callum announced without preamble. "The person Ivy was working to install in your place. His name is Owen Whitfield, a distant cousin of yours through your father's side of the family. Someone who has maintained a quiet presence within the Northern Territory for years, carefully building support among certain disillusioned members of our community." Cale's expression darkened considerably at this revelation. "Owen," he repeated slowly, clearly searching his memory for any recollection of the distant relative Callum had named. "I remember him vaguely, from gatherings during my childhood. I had no idea he harbored such ambitions." "It appears he has been patient," Callum continued, "building alliances quietly, waiting for the right opportunity to present itself. Ivy's resentment toward your leadership provided exactly the opening he needed." "Where is he now?" Cale asked, his tone hardening with renewed determination. "Still within the Northern Territory, as far as we can determine," Callum replied. "Though given that his plan has now been exposed, it's likely he will attempt some form of retaliation, or perhaps flee entirely, before we can address the threat he continues to pose." Mara felt a familiar tension settling over her at this news, the relief she had begun to feel following Ivy's capture, quickly giving way to renewed anxiety regarding this newly revealed danger. Whatever conclusion they had believed they were approaching, now seemed to stretch further into an uncertain and potentially dangerous future. "We need to move quickly," Cale said decisively, "before Owen has the opportunity to either escape or attempt something even more drastic in response to Ivy's capture." Callum nodded in agreement, already outlining a plan to gather a small, trusted group capable of confronting Owen directly, while minimizing the risk of further violence or escalation. Cale listened intently, occasionally offering input, his expression carrying the steady, focused determination that Mara had come to recognize as central to his leadership. As the planning continued, Mara found herself increasingly determined to be included in whatever confrontation lay ahead, despite the obvious danger involved. When she voiced this intention, both Cale and Callum immediately expressed reluctance, concerned for her safety given the volatile nature of the situation they were walking into. "I've already come this far," Mara argued firmly. "I want to see this through to the end, not simply wait here anxiously while you face this danger without me." Cale studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between his instinct to protect her and his growing respect for her determination and courage. "If you insist on joining us," he said finally, "you remain close to me at all times, and you follow every instruction given without hesitation. This is not a situation where independence can be afforded." Mara nodded firmly in agreement, grateful that he had chosen to trust her judgment despite his obvious concerns for her safety. 2 days later, the small group departed toward the Northern Territory, arriving discreetly near the location where Owen Whitfield had reportedly been staying. The tension among the group remained palpable as they approached the modest but well-guarded property, Callum signaling for everyone to remain low and quiet as they assessed the situation before making their move. Inside, they found Owen alone, seemingly unaware that his conspiracy had already been fully exposed. He was a composed, sharp-featured man, his expression shifting rapidly from surprise to calculated calm as Cale entered the room directly, flanked by Callum and several other trusted enforcers, with Mara remaining close behind as instructed. "Cale," Owen said evenly, masking whatever surprise he felt behind a carefully controlled expression. "I see Ivy's confession has led you here rather quickly." "Did you truly believe this would succeed?" Cale asked, his tone carrying a controlled fury that filled the room with palpable tension. Owen's expression remained infuriatingly calm, despite the obvious danger of his situation. "I believe the community deserved stronger leadership than what your father's bloodline alone could provide," he replied coolly. Ivy shared that belief, at least until her own personal grievances complicated matters. "Attempted murder is not leadership," Cale said sharply. "It is cowardice, hiding behind schemes and poison, rather than facing challenges honestly." Owen's calm expression finally cracked slightly at this accusation, a flash of genuine anger crossing his features before he composed himself once more. "You speak of honesty, yet you've spent your entire life benefiting from a position you never had to earn, handed to you simply through birthright." The tension in the room grew increasingly volatile as the confrontation continued, both men clearly recognizing the significant stakes involved. Mara watched anxiously from her position near the entrance. her earlier confidence regarding her decision to join this confrontation now tempered by the very real danger evident in the charged atmosphere surrounding them. Suddenly, without warning, Owen lunged toward a concealed weapon hidden beneath a nearby table, his earlier calm shattering entirely as desperation finally overtook his careful composure. Callum reacted instantly, moving to intercept him before he could retrieve the weapon, the two men grappling fiercely as the rest of the group rushed forward to assist in subduing him. Mara instinctively stepped back, her heart pounding furiously as she watched the brief but intense struggle unfold before her. Within moments, Owen was successfully restrained, his earlier defiance giving way to bitter resignation, as he realized any further resistance would prove futile against the combined strength of Cale's trusted enforcers. As the immediate danger passed, Cale turned toward Mara, his expression softening with relief, upon confirming she remained unharmed throughout the chaotic confrontation. He crossed the room quickly, gently taking her hands in his own, his gaze searching hers for any sign of injury or distress. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his earlier controlled fury giving way entirely to genuine concern for her safety. "I'm fine," Mara reassured him, though her voice trembled slightly from the lingering adrenaline of the confrontation. "It's over now, isn't it?" Cale nodded slowly, glancing back toward Owen, now securely restrained under Callum's watchful guard. "It's over," he confirmed quietly. "Both Ivy and Owen will face judgment for their actions, and this threat to my leadership, and to the safety of our community, has finally been resolved." Relief washed over Mara as the weight of weeks filled with uncertainty and danger finally began to lift from her shoulders. She glanced up at Cale, meeting his gaze steadily, feeling a profound sense of closeness and connection that had grown steadily between them throughout this harrowing journey. "What happens now?" she asked softly, unsure whether she meant the immediate aftermath of Owen's capture or the uncertain future that lay ahead for the two of them personally. Cale's expression grew warm and thoughtful as he studied her carefully, clearly considering the deeper meaning behind her question. "Now," he said gently, "we return home, and we begin figuring out what comes next, together." Mara felt her heart swell at his words, a sense of hopeful anticipation replacing the fear and uncertainty that had defined so much of her recent experience. Whatever challenges still awaited them in rebuilding trust within the community and addressing the aftermath of this dangerous conspiracy, she felt confident that she would face them alongside Cale, her simple, ordinary life forever transformed by that fateful night when she had unknowingly walked into the middle of an assassination attempt against the Alpha King, and chosen, against every reasonable instinct, to stay. As they made their way back toward the estate, the early morning sun rising gently over the horizon, Mara allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to simply feel grateful for the strange and unexpected path that had brought her here. Whatever the future held, she now faced it, not as a frightened waitress, caught in circumstances beyond her control, but as someone who had proven her own courage and resilience amid extraordinary danger, standing firmly beside a man whose life and whose heart she had come to hold inextricably close to her own.